Chapter 10 Year 858 PXF Winter. Talon arrived at the spring in the early afternoon. Unlike his visit 15 months earlier, the spring was already frozen over, and drifts of snow piled around the boulder and covered even the hardy holly and juniper plants. The small shoot that had appeared in the crack of the boulder was still alive, but remained just a tiny woody sapling of some unknown tree, stunted by its harsh location between the halves of the boulder. Talon sat quietly on the boulder, not knowing what to do to commune with Casparian. Perhaps an hour, maybe two, had passed, and even Talon's well-trained form was becoming fatigued from sitting on the hard stone for such an extended period. His shoulders ached, his thighs were cramping, and his feet were so long asleep that he wasn't sure they even still existed or would ever feel alive again. But then the clouds parted, and the sun beamed down on Talon's chilled bones, bringing with it the same warmth of the forge he remembered from his childhood. Talon, feeling Casparian's presence but hearing no voice, posed his questions. "Can you help me find Riken? Where do I start? Do you know where he is?" The requests tumbled out of Talon, even though he had meant to ask of his deity only one.
Very rarely are the paths of nature a straight line, and when forced to be, their outcomes are never what was intended. So are the paths in front of you. One is a straight line, forced and rigid, full of hardship and sacrifices, lying partly in shadow. That path bears a single stunted fruit, but it is the fruit you seek. The other is a winding root that grows and changes with the land and the seasons, one that weathers hardship and is strengthened by it. At its end, a flowering tree unshackled from darkness, bursting with blooms and bountiful harvests. And among that harvest, the one you love.
Talon recalled the stories of the gods he read as a child, and how often the choices they gave were no choice at all. The memory of his battle with the Vermillion blade, and the knowledge that the last remaining chain of his bloodline still tethered him to darkness, remained fresh in Talon's mind. It made his choice clear. "I will follow the path of nature, wherever it leads."
Start by guarding this land, away from the influence of the House of Vermillion. You have earned your freedom. Now grasp it and see where its winds carry you.
Clouds covered the sun, the warmth retreating along with the presence in Talon's mind. Talon stood up from his place beside the spring and took a long look at the space that had become the center of his spirit. A part of him somehow knew it would be many years before he would return, and that part was not wrong. His ride back to the Vermillion estate, the place he soon would no longer call home, was filled with planning about how best to leave it. It took the better part of a fortnight for Talon to sort the belongings he wished to take with him and arrange a flat of rooms in Arnador. The Vermillion name opened many doors in the city, and his coin and credit were readily accepted. With everything in order, Talon first went to Mikal to tell him about his departure. "I am leaving. I now understand the words of your old Dani friend when he took Riken. This house is not a place of healing for those in need of the light. I am leaving so I can find him again. I do not know how long it will take, but I will spend my life searching. Your presence here has helped me more than you know." Talon placed one hand on Mikal's shoulder and the other on the hilt of the dagger Mikal had gifted him. "I will carry this with me always." Mikal, never a man of many words, said only, "I will always be here for you, my boy. Even if it is just here." Mikal laid his calloused hand over Talon's heart. Then he turned back to the forge and his work. Talon respected Mikal's desire to be alone with his emotions, and quietly left. Talon's next stop was to Balanon to thank him for all he had done, from the lessons he taught, to the healing potion for Riken, to the seemingly hundreds of stitches and bandages he had given throughout Talon's training with Lachlan. The half-elf, looking completely unchanged from even Talon's earliest memories, smiled at him with a far too knowing look in his fey-touched eyes. "We shall meet again, Talon Corvermain. If not in this life, then in your next. Lastly, of the people who truly mattered to Talon was Miss Haddington. Before he could speak, she shoved a pack filled to the brim with all his favourites into his arms.
You tell Lolly I will have her apron if I see you old Scrony in a couple of months.
Talon wondered how Miss Haddington knew who Lolly was, then realized that, of course, she would have checked up on the proprietor and cook of the inn where he had rented rooms. Talon reached down and embraced the tiny plump woman in his massive arms, finally ending up on his knees in front of her as the moment's emotion overwhelmed him. Still hugging her as he knelt before her, he wept with his head on her shoulder. This tiny mountain of a woman had raised him and nurtured him through all the joys and pains he had endured. She was the bedrock upon which he had built his life and himself. The crushing immensity of her no longer being a part of his everyday life struck him like a landslide. Her comforting words filled the space between them as she stroked his always wild hair that cascaded over his shoulders.
Oh, Talon, it won't be the same here without you, but you will always be the same in my heart as I hope I will be in yours.
Cradling his face in her loving hands.
Now finish up with that.
Wiping his tears.
You still have your father to deal with, I suspect.
Talon stood up and was transported from being the 12-year-old mischievous and lonely little boy who still couldn't reach Miss Haddington's stash of ginger biscuits above the stove, to the towering man who had conquered the Vermillion blade. He squared his shoulders and took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, looking every inch like a warrior heading into battle. However, he still grabbed a ginger biscuit before he left the kitchen, receiving a swat one last time from Miss Haddington's cooking towel as he did. With neither invitation nor summons, Talon, Vermillion blade slung across his back, opened the door to his father's private study and walked in. An unthinkable act a mere 2 weeks ago was now done without hesitation. Without looking up from his ledger, his father spoke.
You were not summoned.
Talon calmly stated. I am leaving. I will be joining Duke Isul's guard at the keep. Tommen replied boredly.
You will do no such thing. It is beneath a Corvermain to serve thusly.
It is already done. For once, a slight pause from his father.
Then undo it.
An edge now in Tommen's voice. I will be gone by nightfall.
I forbid it!
Tommen stood, hands on desktop, eyes flashing with malice and invoking words he expected to have power.
As keeper of this bloodline and master of House Corvermain, you shall not leave.
Talon felt an ephemeral pull on that remaining chain that tied him to darkness, and realized who had shackled him so. In his bottomless malevolence, his father must have bound his blood to the family's demons and expected the Vermillion blade to seal his control over Talon. Tommen had intended for Talon to become a weapon he could wield. But now, without the Vermillion blade's reinforcement of that original chain, Tommen held no power over his son. Taking on the formality that his tutors had drilled into him as a child, Talon spoke. You cannot forbid me of anything, father. I shall do this, and you will not dishonor my name in my so doing with your forked tongue. The words struck Tommen like a slap across his face, but Talon also saw something else, a flash of fear in his father's eyes. Talon realized the Vermillion blade held influence over all Corvermain blood, and its power now pulled on Tommen, trying to bend him to Talon's command. Neither man bowed to the force of the other's will, even with the magics that assisted each of them, but both acknowledged their uneasy stalemate. Tommen first broke the silence and his gaze by sitting back down at his desk.
Do present and carry yourself as befits your name, if you insist on pursuing this work you have chosen. Your mother will expect you for last friend's remembrance.
The dismissal was absolute. Talon took it as such, and left Tommen Corvermain's private study and the Corvermain estate, with no intent to ever return.